Hi, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Malice in the Mitten. I am your host, Tracy Preston, along with my bestie, Christine Mulligan. Hey, Christine.
Hey, Trace, how's it going? What are we getting into today? It's not child crap again, is it? Because I can't take 2 weeks in a row.
I would never torture you 2 weeks in a row with child stuff.
Okay,
So,
good.
No, we're good. We're good.
All right, what kind of malice we getting into today?
All right, well, you know, when you and I get together and there's a really super fun song on the radio, like the way you bust it out in the car cracks me up, right? You get the dancing going on and you're singing, you're oh so happy, and I love that.
Yeah, you gotta hang out with your wang out every chance you get. Acting cool is the best way to be. Laughter is the best medicine. All of those reasons and the above.
I know, I love it. And Nina, your wife, is an amazing singer. And we know she loves all that karaoke stuff, and she loves singing in the car too, so I love that. And I'm bringing this up for a specific reason. So let's get into it. This is Season 5, Episode 16, Egypt, Covington. Today we are going to tell you a story of a young and beautiful, talented young woman who, if given the chance, could have made it to the big time. She was a very talented musician and singer. She had won the Country Idol contest in Michigan in 2014, which was held at Fraser's Pub in Ann Arbor. She had also auditioned for The Voice. She made several music videos with the singer Mr. Peace and started recording with a local producer, Kevin Zawolum. She could play several instruments and could sing any genre, but she preferred to sing the blues. Jacqueline Elizabeth Egypt Covington was born on July 19th, 1989, to Chuck Covington and Tina Marie Turner Covington. She was born in Detroit, Michigan, and resided in the town of Belleville her whole life. Her parents divorced, and her father remarried a woman named Kristen. The family said that she had 3 parents and was lucky in that respect. She had several siblings. She had a very tight-knit, large family. Egypt was working as a bartender at Fraser's Pub in Ann Arbor. Everyone who came into the bar just loved her. She was entertaining and struck up friendships with whoever came into the bar. She worked side by side with her brother, Dwayne, and they enjoyed working together. It was Dwayne who got her into bartending. He said, quote, "We'd have some light shows, turn down the lights, have flaming bottles of liquor. We'd just have our jokes in between each other and have a lot of fun. So we would have a lot of regulars that would come in, mostly to see her. She was like a shining light. She was great behind the bar, but she had other bigger plans. Craft beer is a booming industry in Michigan, and Egypt landed a job with a distributor as a beer sales rep, and this had an added bonus. She and her on and off again boyfriend, Curtis Meadows, would now be able to pursue their relationship in a more serious and committed endeavor. They had known each other for about 10 years, and through the years, they would struggle in their relationship as Curtis worked a regular 9-to-5 job and had a daughter, and all the responsibilities included with that. And Egypt, well, she lived the life of a bartender, working the night shift, and they never seemed to be on the right wavelength to make things work. But throughout those years of being on and then off again, they never stopped loving one another. And now that she was working regular hours, things had gone to a new level, and Curtis was moving in. On July 22nd, 2017, Egypt was hanging out with her best friend, Lindsay Briley, that day and into the evening. The pair had planned on spending more time together at Egypt's home. However, her friend said that she was too tired and suggested Egypt come to her house. But Egypt said she had to go home and do some cleaning as she was preparing for the transition of Curtis moving in. Throughout the evening, Egypt texted several people. Her best friend Lindsay talking about how excited Egypt was for Curtis to be moving in. Around 10 p.m., Curtis texted Egypt good night and went to bed as he had to work the following day. The next morning, while at work, Curtis texted Egypt with a good morning, as he always did. After waiting for a reply, Curtis texted her again. He said that she would always text back pretty promptly, usually within 5 to 10 minutes, and when he still didn't hear from her, his texts grew more frequent. He decided to try to call her, but there was no answer. Call after call, text after text, and still no answer. He was worried, but trying to be rational, thought maybe she left her phone somewhere. He decided to go to her house and check on her after work. When he pulled up to her house, he saw that her car was there. He thought, she must not have her phone, or that she didn't realize she had left it somewhere. But his gut was telling him something was off. He pulled into the driveway and got out of his vehicle. He walked up to the door and it was open. Now, this may not have been so unusual as it was a duplex with an entryway with a door to the right in which Egypt's neighbors occupied the residence, and the door to the left in which Egypt lived. The door to her apartment was open. He began to have a sinking feeling and was very worried, knowing something was definitely wrong. He called out her name. In response, he heard her dog Ruby barking. As she entered the room, not running to him as she always did, not kissing him in greeting, not wanting to be picked up, but staring him in the eyes, beckoning him to follow her. He followed Ruby a few more steps into the kitchen, and he could see into the living room at that point. What he saw there, he says, unraveled him. It will haunt him for the rest of his life. He saw her feet, and then he took one more step. Egypt was tied up, hands behind her back, in a kind of fetal position on the floor. Blood was covering her head. He knew she was gone. Horrified at the sight, he ran out of the apartment in shock. He ran to his truck where he had left his phone in his console and dialed 911. Here's that call. Quote, "I just showed up at my girlfriend's house and I walked inside. She's there, tied up. She's dead. There's blood all around her head. She's dead. Oh my God." The Van Buren Township Police rushed to the crime scene. When officers arrived, they found Egypt there with a gunshot to the back of her head, and her hands were tied behind her back. Two things that stood out that were very strange to the officers. One, the house had not been broken into. And two, her hands were bound with Christmas lights. Curtis said of those moments, quote, "As humans, we are not designed to see that and deal with it beyond having those images in your head of someone that you love. You love deeply. Then you're trying to fathom your future is gone and everything you planned out in life is gone." The news raced through Egypt's large family. Chuck's daughter Beth called him, hysterically telling him that his daughter was dead. She told him that he should go to her house. On the way, he made the decision to make some gut-wrenching calls to the rest of the family. He dialed Dwayne, Egypt's brother, who was out with friends. He said that they were all sitting there, taking pictures, having drinks. Then he got the call from Chuck, and that was not typical. He fell to the floor, and his friends helped pick him up and take him out back. Chuck's next call is to Egypt's mother and his ex-wife, Tina. She said all she can remember of that was dropping to the floor, screaming and crying, "Not my baby." And how could that happen? It was like mommy wasn't there for you, you know? How could I have protected you? How could I have done better? To know that she was scared to death and she knew she was going to die, it just makes me feel, why? And who? The search to that question put the town on edge and the police department under fire. Coco McAvoy, who now works for Fox LA, covered the story for the NBC affiliate WDIV. She took an interest in the case. Police had said there had been no signs of forced entry, so for Coco, she thought that meant that someone who knows her and possibly loves her just killed her. As investigators would learn, the circle of people who loved Egypt Covington was enormous. She was just larger than life, and so many people loved her. She had a ton of best friends, and she had a ton of acquaintances. Leslie Dixon met Egypt at work, at Egypt's very first bartending job. She says, quote, "I remember teaching her to pour her first beer and her opening it, just a bit, and just like, why is there foam? And I'm like, no girl, pull it down, This is like the ground floor of pouring beer. We were off and running after that." Egypt's talent and gusto for life drew a lot of people to her, and that can sometimes make a murder investigation complicated. Could the stone-cold killer have been someone who was infatuated with her? Was it a family member? A friend? Where do the police start? The person closest to her was her current boyfriend, Curtis Meadows. He was the man who made the grim discovery. Curtis said he was with the police for a few hours, being questioned, writing a statement, letting the police have access to his phone. Police quickly learned that Egypt and Curtis had a complicated history. They had a series of makeups and breakups dating back to 2008 when they first met. When Chuck was questioned if he thought that Curtis had killed his daughter, his answer was no. No, not whatsoever. Within days, the police had Curtis hooked up to a polygraph machine. Curtis was okay with that. He felt that was the quickest way to get their focus in the right direction. Focus on finding the killer and not wasting their time on him. And he was right. He passed the polygraph. And not long after that, Curtis was in the clear. So, who was next on the list? Family and friends were questioned. Some who were close to Egypt were starting to wonder if the right person might be found right next door. The traffic going in and out of the duplex next to Egypt's was constant. Her family spoke of how proud she was of her duplex apartment on the outskirts of town. Her next-door neighbors were also friends of Egypt's, but not long before she was murdered, Egypt's mom said that she shared something with her. She said, quote, "Mom, I gotta move." And I'm like, well, why? She said, "There's people in and out of there all the time that I've never seen before, but not the type of people I want to see." She had a gut feeling that some bad things were happening over there. She shared with her mother that she thought those bad things were drugs. Egypt's neighbors had a license to grow and sell legal marijuana. Egypt's neighbor, however, said they never sold anything illegal. Still, her family wondered if the neighbor's next-door marijuana business had anything to do with Egypt's murder. Detectives questioned her neighbors and asked them where they were the night of the murder. Turns out, they were at a music festival 20 miles away and nowhere near the scene of the crime. At this point, there is no one in custody, and they were still investigating. The Van Buren police sent the Christmas lights that bound Egypt's wrist for DNA testing, but that led nowhere. With no one in custody, the lake town was on edge. That was also something that didn't help the community, as many were fearful because the police kept saying that she had known her killer and they weren't releasing any details. So, of course, people were looking at their own friends, neighbors, and even family, wondering, is there a killer amongst us? The detectives were hearing that Egypt had no shortage of men vying for her attention. One man friends had heard stories about was a former boss. He was married, and no one seemed to think they had any kind of intimate relationship. However, he had taken a keen interest in her singing career. After the big country idol contest win, he had offered to take Egypt to Nashville for the next big tryout, is what she told her friend Leslie. And Leslie said, quote, he was paying for stuff, her singing, for her to go to The Voice. Yeah, and he was in love with her. I think he was obsessed with her. Leslie thought the trip to Nashville was a bad idea, but Egypt went anyway. When she got there, Egypt told Leslie there had been an argument. And what was the fight over? Well, Leslie said it was probably something to do with not having a relationship. She thought he may have been angry over the fact that Egypt didn't want more. Dwayne, Egypt's brother, knew this guy well and says he saw other red flags. Being a hothead and fast to react, quote, you set him off and he goes off his rocker. It gave them concerns. Investigators looked into the former boss, who told them he would cooperate fully. He says he was never romantically interested in Egypt and that his wife knew about the trip to Nashville. As for the description of his temper, he said he was a firm boss, but denied being a hothead. Still, family and friends passed anything they could think of that may help in catching Egypt's killer to the police. As police questioned Curtis, they asked if he had any theories. He said 2 came to mind. One would be Kenny, and the other, the neighbors. But number 1 on the list would be Kenny, Egypt's ex-boyfriend. Who was this Kenny? Kenny Mahalik was a guy Egypt had dated during one of her breakups with Curtis, and word was that he wasn't too happy about Curtis and Egypt's future plans. According to family and friends and Curtis, Egypt didn't feel like she could go anywhere that Kenny wouldn't already be there as well. Kenny was 10 years older than Egypt, a mechanic who was quiet, handsome, and a bit of a player. He attracted a lot of women because he was so good looking. Egypt's mom remembers a family gathering where Kenny caught Egypt's attention. She had pointed him out to her mom and said, quote, I'm going to date him someday. Well, then her mom said, well, you know, his reputation is he's never going to get married. And Egypt, in response to that, said, well, I'll fix that. While Egypt and Curtis were in the on and off phase of their relationship, she made her move on Kenny, and they started dating. Nora and Egypt worked together at a local pub where Kenny was a regular. Nora said she didn't see any kind of a spark between them. She said that Egypt obviously cared for him from what she saw, but she didn't see anything that stood out. Like, quote, maybe just someone like Mr. Right Now, a placeholder, I guess. It was obvious to her friends and family that Egypt wanted what most young women want, to settle down eventually, maybe get married and have a family. But she didn't really see a future in this relationship. During the time they were together, she grew close to his family. Friends also told investigators of some abuse that Egypt made mention of, but nothing too serious, enough that it caused concern though. One incident was at a wedding, and Kenny grabbed Egypt and pushed her up against a wall and held her there. The police were called. However, no charges were filed because the wedding party insisted of being supportive and helpful, made Egypt feel guilty for, quote, ruining their special time. Egypt's mom said she may have mentioned to her about an instance of being pushed, but she never even thought that Kenny was the murderer, let alone being abusive. She had even let Kenny babysit Egypt's dog Ruby after the death of her daughter, which caused contention amongst the family. When asked why she believed in his innocence, her response was, quote, you know, I was raised to believe that you don't ruin someone's life without proof. It was thought that when Kenny and Egypt parted ways, it wasn't a complete breakup, Like if they wanted to call or text, it was still a possibility. And it wasn't until Curtis and Egypt got back together that it became a problem. It made her feel uncomfortable that wherever she was, he was usually there. He was purposely showing up where he knew she would be. Her stepmom, Chris, said that Egypt had wanted to tell Kenny that he needed to give her some space, but it was hard for her to do so. Quote, when she said, "Mom, he's like a lost puppy," I said, "You can't save every lost puppy. Sometimes you just have to do what you have to do and move on." Egypt knew it wasn't fair to Kenny for her to still hang around his family and not sever those ties, and she wouldn't be able to fully have the chance in the relationship with Curtis that she wanted. So, according to Chris, Egypt planned on telling Kenny at the Strawberry Festival, an annual Belleville event that Kenny was guaranteed to be at with his friends. Curtis was also going to be in attendance. That night, Curtis arrived before Egypt and immediately spotted Kenny. He kept his distance, not trying to impose. He went to the opposite side as far away as he could get, sitting with his friends and family. Egypt showed up, eventually made her way over to Kenny while Curtis watched from a distance. He couldn't tell what they were talking about, but he said, quote, "You could tell it was some kind of intense conversation that was going on." Before long, Curtis saw Egypt heading his way with Kenny hot on her heels. They got in each other's faces and Egypt stormed off. She was very upset, and the conversation obviously had not gone the way she had planned. That was a Saturday night, and 5 days after a very public fight, Egypt Covington was dead. After she was gone, her colleagues at the brewery started thinking about a cool way to remember Egypt. They crafted a new beer called A Girl Named Egypt. Rick Lack, a friend and mentor to Egypt, helped develop it. They had her photo, her tattoo, and her microphone. There was a song bar and notes in there. They wanted to make it big and bold. When asked if it was a strong beer, the response, quote, "It's a relatively strong beer by craft beer standards, 9% alcohol by volume, so you're certainly not going to operate heavy machinery after consuming a couple. Strong like Egypt." Now, there's also a link in the sources for the show so that you can see this beer. It's pretty cool. Detectives were zeroing in on Kenny Mihalik. He had been picked up by police early on. They had grilled him about his whereabouts on the night Egypt was murdered. A few hours after her body had been found, in fact. Kenny said he had gone bar hopping, and later, during a critical window of time when they thought Egypt had been murdered, he had been home, alone. Detectives hooked him up to a polygraph, and when the police told him he failed, word quickly spread around town. Right after that, Kenny lawyered up and stopped talking to the police. Tina, Egypt's mother, very publicly supported Kenny, and that, of course, caused a rift with the family. At the celebration of life for Egypt, Kenny did not come in, but Tina saw him with his nephews. When she asked Kenny's mom why he wouldn't come in, she said he was scared. Tina had him come in with her and sit next to her. The room fell silent. Tina believed Kenny to be innocent, and Chuck believed him to be guilty. Now, that's Egypt's dad. It really divided the family. It divided the community and set everyone on edge. Egypt's brother was torn and could see the division in the family getting worse. And in the middle of all the tension and family drama, Dwayne met someone, a woman named Lindsay Brink. He chose not to tell her about Egypt. He hadn't wanted to bring in all this baggage at this time, but just a few weeks into dating, Lindsay found out anyway, which is, kind of hard not to, really. She asked who the beautiful person on his phone was, because it was a screensaver, and he said, "That's my sister." She thought it was odd that he had his sister as a screensaver and asked him why. He said, "Well, She was murdered, and it's still unsolved. Lindsay, who lived about 30 miles away from Belleville, remembered hearing about Egypt's murder, but didn't know anything beyond the headlines. Dwayne filled her in. He told her all about the family divide and that just about everyone except for his mother suspected Egypt's ex-boyfriend. It made her nervous as she was starting to fall in love with Dwayne. She thought that there could be a possibility that he had killed his own sister. So she drilled him. She asked him where he was that night. Did he have proof? And what happened? Dwayne's story was airtight. But what about everyone else's? Lindsay, who was a kindergarten teacher by day, thought they could help the police solve the mystery. So Dwayne's new lady went from girlfriend to detective just like that. She dove in like an investigator. She was just getting started in March of 2018, 9 months after Egypt's murder. The Van Buren Township Police had an announcement. They had a person of interest, Kenny Mahalik. She asked the police what had changed. Coco McAvoy worked her sources as well, wanting to know why the police were now naming Kenny. Coco called the lieutenant and asked him what has changed. And he said, Coco, we know that Kenny did it. We really want him to come in and talk to us. Egypt's mom was still standing by Kenny's side and had even hired her own private investigator. What in the hell? Why is this mom so stuck on this guy being innocent?
I mean, maybe because she had a vibe that he didn't do it. I mean, I haven't heard you say anything where it does point to that he did do it, other than being quasi-obsessed with her and showing up in some of the places that she worked and all of that. There was nothing real malicious, no malice in the past other than one time pushing her at a wedding. Do you know what I mean? So they got into an argument at a wedding, but that was it. Like, nothing happened after that. So there's no real, I don't know. I don't see a clear line from what I've heard you talk about. There's not a clear line that he did it. And why are they not going into the marijuana dealers next door to her yet?
Right. I mean, with all the traffic in and out, I mean, and this woman, Egypt, was stunning. I'm saying stunning. So who's to say anybody strolling in and out of this apartment? Now, granted, the people that lived there who were growing and selling, they weren't home. But all these people in and out, if they saw her, they don't need the neighbors to be home.
Well, you said that she was stunning, but you didn't say that she was, like, sexually assaulted when she was murdered, right? She was just tied up and shot?
Right. So
no assault on her, though, right?
Not that I know of.
Yes, she was murdered. I don't mean no assault on her, but
like
no
sexual
assault. No,
right.
None of that.
Right.
Okay.
And, the other thing, too, maybe why they're thinking it's this Kenny dude, is there was no sign of breaking in. There were no obvious signs that someone broke in. So,
and another thing is maybe it's my friendship with you that has me even freaking knowing things like this, because I'm not a murder mystery watcher all the time. However, they shot her in the back of the head, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of person that knows her would shoot her in the back of the head? Anyone that knows her, especially if it was Kenny, if it was an ex and he was jilted, it definitely would have been more abusive, more passionate of a crime. This seems like a cold, callous crime where they had no use for her. So, like, none of it's tracking for me for it to be somebody that she knows.
Yeah, I can go with that. But also, right, so like in some of our other stories, that passionate rage, they don't want it to end so damn quick. They want to really...
Passionate rage is all messy. She was tied up and then shot in the back of the head. Yeah. Almost like execution style.
Yeah.
So I don't see the personal touch in it, is what I'm saying. Like, when they're crimes of passion from somebody that you know and that person feels jilted by her or what have you, it would have been a passionate crime. This seems very cold and callous and almost calculated, and in a matter of frustration.
Yeah.
Like, she was tied with whatever was handy, which was Christmas lights. So it wasn't well thought out at all. And then it wasn't a crime of passion. It was just a cold and callous shot to the back of the head, which, I mean, I'm no detective, and I'm not even an avid crimey person, but I feel like that in and of itself, all of this other stuff about it being her ex-boyfriend or a boyfriend at all in her past, someone that was intimate with her, this is not the way someone that was intimate with her would have killed her. I don't imagine that. And maybe that's how the mother felt too. Like, why would he shoot her in the back of the head? If he was in love with her and infatuated with her, why would he do that?
Yeah, it kind of just seems like there was an opportunity to strike and someone struck.
Yeah. It just doesn't ring true to me. I'm going to be hella surprised if you tell me that this was someone that knew her. That's all I'm going to do. That's all I'm going to say. Let me not get ahead of it too much, because it still sounds like you got a lot to tell me, because they're still hung up on the ex-boyfriend, but I'm not buying any of it. I'm not buying that it's somebody that knew her.
All right, let's see what happens.
All right, let's go. Let's see.
All right, so Lindsay and Dwayne wanted answers from Kenny himself. So they picked up the phone and called him. They just said, quote, "Kenny, did you do it? Did you kill her?" "No, I did not kill your sister." Now, most killers, if we are being real, will not admit to anything at all. So they asked, "Do you have proof?" Kenny told them that he did and agreed to sit down and tell them his side of the story. On June 14th, 2018, there was an interview with a private investigator. After the interview with Kenny, the PI shared the information with Lindsay and Dwayne. They started to believe that Kenny did, in fact, have a good alibi, and maybe the police had not done enough to check out the facts. They decided to share the information with Chris and Chuck. It did not go over well, with Lindsay leaving partway through the dinner and discussion. They felt because Lindsay had never known Egypt, had never met her, that it had been rude to come to them in their own home, and that it was disrespectful. She could see where they were coming from and decided to give up and let it be. She told Dwayne about her decision, and he said, quote, "Lindsay, please don't stop. Please don't allow this to stop our fight for my sister. I'm done. I'm not here to break your family apart." After some long talks, Dwayne managed to convince her to stay the course. The next move was a meeting with detectives. That didn't go over well either. Dwayne and his girlfriend Lindsay refused to be mere spectators as the police investigated the murder of his sister. Their drive more than compensated for their lack of experience. They had made their library into a war room where they actually took the wall and started placing pins and writing names and web diagrams. They were open-minded about everything and did not omit anyone on the list of who may have been responsible. When they spoke with the police about the case, they were contentious and they suggested getting the Michigan State Police involved in the case. The local dicks didn't like that idea. After the meeting, Lindsay and Dwayne made it their mission to get the case out of the hands of the Van Buren and into the hands of the state police. Lindsay started copying the state police on the emails she was sending to local officials trying to draw attention to the investigation. They started an online petition calling for the state police to take over the case. More than 14,000 people signed it. That didn't go over well with Egypt's father and stepmother. Social media comments were negative on all accounts of the petition. Some saw Lindsay as a troublemaker, wanting all the attention for herself. She says her motivation was simple. Because the man she loved so dearly, and that's why she wanted him and his family to find justice. They started attending town council meetings held over Zoom. Months went by, then another year. Every chance they got, they pestered local officials, writing emails that criticized the local police, asking for help getting the investigation moved. But they never got any responses. But then, one day they did. They had been accidentally left on a responding email from the township clerk stating, quote, "Is there any way these emails to everyone can be blocked? I'm personally not interested in the stupidness." What? We are talking about a woman in your own town who has been murdered. So, of course, they blasted that email all over township pages. They put that email everywhere. This is what your county clerk thinks of an unsolved murder, calling this stupidness because we are trying to get her case into the right hands. This caused an uproar. The clerk later apologized, saying he meant no disrespect to Egypt or her family. He was trying to get off the email chain, but this helped fuel a public response. Lindsay and Dwayne held a march, and just one day later, in July of 2020, detectives James Plummer and Sean Street of the Michigan State Police were taking over the investigation. The new investigators got to work, and right in the file, a bit of evidence that had been there all along jumped out at them. Van Buren police had preserved a video from a gas station around the corner from Egypt's house. By November of 2020, more than 3 years had passed since Egypt's murder, and the evidence was piling up. They left no stone unturned, followed all leads, even ones that locals had exhausted. When asked if it made sense to look at Kenny as a suspect and stay with him or move on, the answer was, quote, "It would be negligent to stay onto one person and not explore other options, not to put all of your eggs, investigative eggs, in one basket." The next question, quote, "Do you think that's what they did? They put all their eggs in the Kenny basket?" The reply, "I believe so. Yes, they did." They quickly came to the same conclusion that Lindsay and Dwayne had come to. Kenny did not commit this horrendous act. The file had indeed been full of other interesting evidence, cell phone data, and security video. They had it and just never looked into it because they were so focused on Kenny. We've talked about that before. The lens needs to be widened and look at everyone.
Yeah, I think they were pigeonholing Kenny and they were just stuck on him. But from the onset, like we talked about before, the whole passion of it all, if that was his motive, that she wasn't being with him and she was being with Curtis, there's no passion in the actual crime. Kenny's not the person. So, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Mom's instincts were on point. The state police dug in and right away found a report that led them into a whole new direction. The local police department had put a geofence on her house, and that basically identifies phones in that area, and it hits on a phone. A phone that was in fact in the area at the time of the murder. It came back to a guy from Toledo, Ohio. They never looked into it any further, but the state police plotted the phone and found that it had actually been inside Egypt's house at the time she had been believed to have been murdered. The investigation moved at lightning speed after that. The owner of the cell phone was named Shandon Groom. He lived in Ohio and had no apparent connection to Egypt, but also in the file was the video from the gas station near Egypt's duplex. They noticed in the video there was a blue truck that had an Ohio license plate, and it was easily identifiable. When they ran the plates on the truck, who did that link back to? You got it, Shandon Groom. It was all very suspicious, but no proof of murder. So they focused on the Christmas lights that had tied Egypt's hands behind her back. In 2017, DNA testing yielded 3 profiles. 1 was Egypt's and 2 were unknown. The amount of data was not enough to automatically run through the national data bank called CODIS, wasn't as good as it is today. So in 2020, advancements had come a long way. So they reanalyzed those profiles, and a profile was able to be obtained from there. And there was a hit on DNA. It was a man named Tim Moore, also from Ohio. Detective Plummer had access to Tim's phone records from previous arrests. Did he know Shandon Groom? Well, as it turns out, Tim had his number saved under his contacts. Police still didn't know what connected these two men to Egypt, but they felt they had enough. They arrested the two men in Ohio. They thought if once they were under arrest, they would give an interview and be able to get more insight on what had happened. Detective Plummer called Egypt's mother right away. He said, quote, "I know you have been waiting for this day for a really long time. We have made an arrest." They did not release the names of the two men, and the arrest announcement was all that they shared until the two men could be extradited back to Michigan. Lindsay and Dwayne even went as far as calling Kenny on the phone, and when he answered, they knew that it wasn't him. The whole family seemed to sit on edge of their seats, wanting to know, but they were all in the dark. But investigators were not done making arrests. There was a gut punch coming. It wasn't the who. Rather, the punch would come with the why. The two men who were under arrest did not want to talk to police, so they were charged and extradited back to Michigan, but there was still not a reason to go with the crime. But the cell phone data revealed the reason why Egypt lost her life. On the night of the murder, they had made a stop at a house just down the road from Egypt's duplex. The guy who lived there was named Shane Evans. He had a close connection to one of the men from Ohio in custody. After looking into Timothy Moore, they realized that Shane Evans and Tim Moore were half-brothers. And the half-brother Shane Evans was the connection to Egypt. They had gone to the same high school years earlier. The detectives woke Shane Evans up with a search warrant at 5 a.m. and took him to the station to answer some questions. They learned that Shane Evans actually worked for a company that cut the grass for the duplex, and that during the day prior to Egypt's murder, he had actually been there cutting her grass. Shane denied any involvement in the murder. Then, the detectives did something investigators often do. They exaggerated the evidence. They told Shane they saw him on video driving near Egypt's house and that his half-brother was cooperating with the police. The gamble paid off. At that moment, he broke, and he was the first suspect to spill exactly what happened that horrific night. And it's a stunning story. Remember Egypt's neighbors? They were, growing that medical marijuana. Shane Evans told investigators he knew all about that, how they were going to be out of town for the music festival. He said that he knew nobody would be home. The plan was to break in, expecting to find lots of drugs that they could sell for cash. Shane Evans' job was to take them to the location, drive past it, and point it out. He said he rolled past it, and he was following behind him in the truck. Quote, "I pointed at the house, and I kept going." He told them to go in the door and go to the right and break into that house. When they walked into the door to the duplex, they were supposed to go right, but instead of following the directions he gave them, they went in the left door, into Egypt's door, and they were confronted by her in the kitchen. As they walked into the house, Tim had a gun. They tell Egypt to sit down as they look through the house. They searched for marijuana, but it was not there. At some point, Egypt starts messing around on her phone, so they order her onto the ground and tie her up with Christmas lights. And before leaving, Tim takes her phone and he puts a pillow over the back of her head and fires. Later that night, Tim sends his half-brother a text, quote, "Wrong door." Shane texts him back and mentions the right door. Tim texts back, "Oops." They could have left her and went on about their day, but they didn't. A talented young woman lost her life because of a mistake. Shane Evans was arrested right after his confession, and Egypt's family learned the horrible truth. But why did Timothy Moore decide to kill Egypt instead of leaving after realizing the mistake? At the time of the crime, He was on parole, and it was a female witness who had identified him and sent him to prison. So he knew that if he were ever to commit another crime, he needed to make sure that there were no witnesses. The arrest happened 3 months after the state detectives took over the case from the local PD. Just 3 fucking months.
Crazy ineptitude, dude. Crazy ineptitude.
Yep. The Van Buren police told Dateline that they worked very hard on the case and disputed the critics that their department lacked expertise in electronic evidence. They said their detectives looked at other subjects other than Kenny Malahik over the course of the investigation, and I call bullshit. Prosecutors were convinced that they had enough evidence to convict all 3 men, but not one of them stood trial. In April of 2023, Shane agreed to testify against Tim and Shandon. At that point, they realized they had no hope. The 3 men made plea agreements with the prosecutor, pleading guilty to second-degree murder. Dwayne spoke at the sentencing, quote, "I just wanted the courthouse aware of what we're missing. Egypt. Our Jacqueline Elizabeth Egypt Covington. We're going to miss her so much. She touched so many people. She's a beautiful person, and we'll always remember her." Her dad, Chuck, also addressed the courtroom, quote, "My daughter's life was reduced to an oops. They hogtied my daughter with Christmas lights. They shot my daughter in the back of her head. There's no way anyone in their right mind would ever want these people out on the streets in society again. They're corrupt. They are murderers. They deserve the death penalty." But this was not a death penalty case. Oh, and we don't have that here in Michigan anyway. Shane Evans was sentenced to 15 to 25 years in prison. Shandon Groom received 17 to 26 years in prison. Timothy Moore, the shooter, was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison. The case is finally closed, and the answers that everyone who loves Egypt searched for were finally answered. Even still, the divide between the family has still not healed. They all know that it is what Egypt would want, and who knows, maybe in time. As they say, time heals all wounds. I honestly think that time just mends them enough to bear the grief, because it never really goes away. The scars of grief will forever be upon all of the people who loved Egypt Covington. Chuck has set up a fund with Egypt's memory in her name to help kids learn to play musical instruments, and he's proud of the monument Belleville created for her. The inscription comes from Egypt's journal. It is a memorial and a playground because Egypt very much liked kids, and she would have been a great mom, her father said. So many of Egypt's friends and family say they'll remember her for all the love she put out in the world. Quote, "She was great at receiving love, and she was great at giving love, much of it through her soaring voice." Thank you so much, Angela Sinclair, for researching and writing this story. What a senseless tragedy. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming back as always. You know it means so much to us. So have yourself a great week, and we will see you back on Wednesday for Round Robin. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.